Now, I'm a product of the Reagan years. I became a conservative in the 1980s. Why? Because I saw this character, Reagan, a genial, affable, self-deprecating guy, a guy with a wonderful and you may say collegial sense of humor. At one point, this was in the 1982 recession, Reagan was cornered by Sam Donaldson of ABC News. Some of you will be old enough to remember. Sam Donaldson was, an adversary of Reagan. He was sort of the Wolf Blitzer of his day. And he goes, "Mr. President, in this recession you have blamed the media, and you have blamed the economists, and you have blamed the Democratic Party, but does any of the blame belong to you?" And Reagan goes, "Well, yes, because for many years I used to be a Democrat." And I recall this episode now almost nostalgically because I remember even Sam Donaldson started laughing. There was a kind of reciprocity between the two men, and it was a time in American politics where you'd have Reagan over here, you'd have the Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, over here, and the two of them would fight it out on policy, but they could totally be envisioned having a Guinness afterward. In other words, there was an Irish camaraderie between them, and that was the America of then. But that is actually not the America of now. And part of what we have to think about isn't just how is it that we have all this craziness, Antifa patrolling the campuses, threats of violence, talk about kicking the opposition. Where does all this come from? What's really going on? What really seems to have happened at the beginning is people are looking at the same thing, but they are interpreting it in such different ways that you almost wonder if there are two different lenses in the camera. You saw this with the Kavanaugh hearings. You saw the same facts were put out there for everyone to see. There were no additional facts that one side had, the other side didn't know. But nevertheless, two sets of people totally convinced that they're totally right. And you see this in media. If you're conservative and right-wing, you're watching Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, talk radio. If you're on the left, NPR. So suddenly you have different media being supplied to the two different sides. And I want to try to get into this and try to explain what's going on. What's changed in America? Well, one thing that's changed is that in the 80s, I think, by and large, the debate in American politics was not about goals. It was only about means. And what I mean by that is if Reagan stood up and said, "I believe in an America that's strong. I want an America that is prosperous. I believe that technological capitalism creates the goose that lays the golden eggs. I want America to have influence all over the world, and I want America to be an example to the world. And I want people to look up to America, and I want America to be a magnet for all of humanity. I want the American recipe to be what everybody wants." And if this was the goal, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Democrat who really disagreed. Now, there were disagreements, but the disagreements over things like this. If America is prosperous, how should we split the pie? How should we divide up the golden eggs, if you will? Or if America is going to be an example to the world, should America do it alone, or America seek allies who can work together with us to achieve those goals? But the disagreement, as you can see, is over tactics and not over objectives. Today, the reason it's difficult to have bipartisanship, it's difficult to meet halfway, is it appears that the two sides want to go in opposite directions. So this is not like the 80s. In fact, this is more like, I would say, the 60s, but I don't mean the 1960s, I actually mean the 1860s. When in fact you had two sides who had radically irreconcilable goals. And it was very difficult in that time to figure out how do you find the middle. Now, having lived through America now for the better part of almost 2 generations, I try to ask myself, what is it in America that's really changed? And let me point to one thing that I think is helpful in trying to understand what we call the culture war. One thing that's changed dramatically is that from the beginning of America, from not just the founding, from before, all the way until I would say the 1950s, maybe the early 60s, there was a moral consensus in this country that there is a moral order in the universe that is external to us that makes claims on us. Our job is to try to live up to the standards of that moral code. Now, there was some disagreement about what the moral code is. Obviously, Christians and Jews might disagree about what it is, but let's just take the Ten Commandments as representing this external moral code. If you went around in 1950 and approached Americans and said, hey, do you think the country would be better if everybody followed the Ten Commandments? 99% of all Americans would go, yeah. And it wouldn't even matter if you were Christian or Jewish, you could be a non-believer, and you'd answer, yeah. So this represented a shared agreement across the whole society. It reflected, if you will, the deep Judeo-Christian roots of this country. Now, this is not to say that everybody obeyed the moral code, but even if you didn't, even if you fell short, that was your standard. That's what you measured yourself against. So what has changed in America now, as I see it, and I see it especially with young people, and I'm sure it's true of many of you, is a shift in the source of morality. Now, a lot of older people don't understand this, and they will say, morality has gone to hell. America has seen a moral decline. And what I'm saying is something a little different, not just that we've seen a decline in morality, what we have seen is a change in what morality is and where it comes from. So a change in the locus or roots of morality. In other words, the change can be summarized this way, that in the past, Americans believed that morality is out there, and now we believe, many of us in America, that morality is in here. Morality now doesn't come from the external code, it comes from the inner self. And that means that when young people today, many of you, face a choice, and I don't just mean a deep moral conundrum, any choice. Should I, Juliana, go to law school or become a poet? Do I, Jim, love Sally? If you're trying to answer that question, how do you do it? Do you consult your parents or your pastor or God? Well, for a lot of young people today, none of the above. You dig into yourself, you look deep into the sort of inner self, that little being inside of you, to guide you authoritatively about what you should do and how you should be. And this is something that is kind of new in the world. In other words, the self as the ultimate adjudicator of morality. That's something kind of startling. My father would really not have understood it. I remember, in fact, going years back to my dad and saying, hey, Dad, I have been thinking about becoming a writer. He goes, son, I really think you should do something useful with your life. And I had to try to explain, because he said, isn't it the fact that you have been admitted to the Wharton Business School? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, why aren't you going? I go, well, Dad, so you see, I kind of feel called to be a writer. And what I was getting at was I was trying to describe the sense of self-fulfillment that I was searching in doing something that I really enjoyed. And my dad was like, let me summarize. You are saying that there is a little being that lives inside of you. Let's call him Little Dinesh. You appear to consult with this creature in making important decisions that will affect your life. And I realized in this conversation with my dad, it wasn't that he disagreed with me. He just didn't know what the hell I was talking about. He had no idea. Why? Because I was describing this morality of the inner self that was utterly alien to him, completely. A lot of the roots of our culture war are in this. Because when you think of an issue, whether it's pro-life, abortion, gay marriage, let's think about it. In the old days, if you mentioned gay marriage, someone would say, what are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? Consult the definition of marriage. Look at the external moral code. Remember that marriage has a lot of criteria. It has actually 3 fence posts. The first one is that both parties have to be adults. Second, there have to be 2. There can't be 7. Third, you have to be unrelated. You can't marry a sister. So there are all these fence posts that define marriage. And the fourth one is a man, one's a woman. So that's the external code. And to people who have been raised in that code, they don't understand why we want to pull up one fence post and keep all the others intact. Because if the argument for pulling up one is good, why not pull up all of them? Why have marriage at all? But of course, to the person arguing for gay marriage, it's not about that at all. It's ultimately about something like this. I don't know if it's nature, I don't know if it's nurture, but this is who I am. In other words, it's an appeal to the inner self. And the inner self is the adjudicator, the referee, the final word, and it trumps, if I can use that phrase, it trumps the external code. So to me, these are the sort of moral roots of what we're arguing about. And you can help to see why we can't argue. It's more like two ships in the night because both sides are using a different moral lens. Now, into this complicated ethical thicket comes a large elephant in the living room, and his name is Donald J. Trump. Trump. And he comes in as president, and everybody is a little startled. Why? Because this is a very, to quote my wife, out there guy. He has a very unique approach to politics. Reagan was a man of priorities. Reagan would say, you can't change the world in 30 ways. You can change it in maybe 2 ways. Let's focus on the Soviet Empire, and let's focus on stagflation, which was a combination of stagnation and inflation. Let's focus on that. Leave everything else. Let it go. That's not Trump. This guy's fighting on every front. Here's tax reform. Here's the trade treaty. Here, let's nick away at Obamacare. Let's change the court. And while all this policy stuff is going on, let's swat Meryl Streep. Boom. Let's get us failing CNN, Saturday Night Live. This dude is fighting the political war and the cultural war both. Now, at the first glance, this appears to be insane. We didn't elect Trump to fight a culture war. But the truth of it is that Trump recognizes that the fight is not just between the Republican and the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has 3 extremely powerful allies: academia, the media, and the entertainment industry. And this is the, you may call it, outer fringe of the Democratic Party that is actually more powerful than the Democratic Party itself and does the work of the Democratic Party, but does it in the name of neutrality. And so this is what the Republicans are up against. The other thing that's going on, which I think is very troubling, is the gangsterization of American politics that has occurred really in the last 10 years. And by the gangsterization of American politics, I mean this. It is the idea that the person who disagrees with you isn't your critic, he's your enemy. You have to shut him up or take him out. When I was dealing with the US government, this is the Holder Justice Department and this is the prosecutorial agency in New York, it was very clear to me that if they could have imprisoned me for a $20,000 donation with no benefit to myself, if they could have imprisoned me for 10 years, they would have been delighted to do it. Their goal? Take this guy out. And people say, well, why would they want to take you out? And the answer was that just a few months earlier, I had made a movie about Obama, but it wasn't a critique of Obama's policies. I exposed Obama as a flagrant hypocrite. Why? He had been going all over the country saying, we are our brother's keeper. Very Obama-esque. And I went to Kenya, where I found his actual brother in a hut in Nairobi, where if you stretched your 2 arms, you would hit the walls. And walking through the muck, we sat down in an interview, and I asked his brother, what has Obama done to help you? And the guy goes, absolutely nothing. He hasn't lifted a finger to help me. And here I'm living in third world slumdog millionaire style poverty. So to put this on the screen, well, it upset the president. And I should have, I was kind of dumb. I was an immigrant in a way. I was like, I should have realized that the empire is going to strike back. Now, frankly, when I go to campus and I tell people this, they go, Dinesh, come on, be ridiculous. I mean, what makes you think Obama even saw your dumb movie? What makes you think he cared about it? And I go, well, the reason I think he cared about it is that right after the movie came out, vituperative attacks began to appear every day, attacking me by name on a website that happened to be called BarackObama.com. That's kind of where I got the idea that I had pissed him off. Now, the thing about Trump, Trump is sort of the anti-Obama. And the thing about Trump is that he has very striking human failings that, peculiarly enough, turn out to be political virtues at this time. For example, Trump has, I think he would admit, a Himalayan ego. He's unbelievably conceited. And in fact, in my recent movie, Death of a Nation, I have a movie poster, and somewhat provocatively I decided to merge the images of Lincoln and Trump. And it gives a lot of people a double take. They go, man, Dinesh, what were you thinking? Come on, Lincoln, Trump, are you nuts? But then it occurred to me, and their point, of course, is that how dare you put Trump in the same image with Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. But then it occurred to me that probably Trump feels the same way. He probably comes in and goes, what? I've been compared with Lincoln? The guy in the tall hat? Dinesh, what are you thinking? So Trump is an egotist. But when you're a president and you're trying to get stuff done and you're being flayed on every platform every second of every day, not just by the Democrats, not just by the media, not just by every comedian in Hollywood, you're being knifed by people in your own party. It's really helpful in that environment to have the kind of secure ego that basically keeps you untouched, even while all this craziness is going on. So that is part of what gives Trump the confidence to plow ahead. The other thing about Trump is, I think you may have noticed this, that if you attack him, he is emotionally incapable of not attacking you back. He loves to do it. He can't help it. And it doesn't matter who you are. You can be an absolutely insignificant, I mean, think of somebody like Omarosa. Everybody's nightmare. Certainly every Republican's nightmare. If Omarosa came in the room, every Republican would go under the chair and wait for the woman to leave. But not Trump. Trump's ready. And so with Trump, what happens is this urge to hit back is, I agree from a human point of view, it's kind of a deficiency. I mean, we don't teach our children to do this. We teach them restraint, self-control, pick your fights. But interestingly, at this moment, I think for the Republican Party, see, the Republican Party has been nominating one Boy Scout after another. McCain, Romney. Romney is such an unbelievable Boy Scout. I mean, if I were writing his college recommendation to Texas A&M, it would begin with something like this: not since Jesus Christ. Not since. Squeaky clean. But here's the problem. The moment Romney comes onto the national stage, within 5 minutes, the left makes him into Lucifer. You're greedy, you're selfish, you're an exploiter. Where did you get $200 million? And Romney is on the defensive, up against the wall, explaining, apologizing. Now you notice that nobody makes this accusation against Trump. Nobody goes, hey Trump, where did you get $1 billion? Trump has more money than Romney. How did you get $1 billion? You can't do this to Trump, because if you do it, he'll sit you down and explain to you that he has $2 billion. He's a lot richer than you thought. So with Trump, this desire to hit back, I think, reflects a tendency in the Republican Party now to say, okay, if you gangsterize one side, the other side has to get tough. That's the sad reality of the situation. In other words, would we like to live in the kinder, gentler Reagan era that I grew up in? Yes. But that era is not here anymore. Reagan wouldn't understand it. He'd be a fish out of water, because the political waters are too roiled right now. But the one guy I think who would be completely at home in America today is Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because the waters were even more roiled when Lincoln came in. And Lincoln realized, a very moderate man, by the way, that there was a time to be extremely tough. In fact, when Lincoln was first elected, he was surrounded by Republicans. I call them the rhinos of 1860, Republicans in name only. And they were like, Lincoln, there's trouble ahead. You have to get rid of the platform that we Republicans campaigned on just a couple of months earlier. And Lincoln was like, what? They were like, yeah, we campaigned on stopping the spread of slavery, but that's not going to work right now. What we've got to do is take the Missouri Compromise line, the Mason-Dixon line, and push it out to California. North of the line, no slavery, ever. South of the line, slavery forever. This was called the Crittenden Compromise. And Abraham Lincoln said, in effect, he said, I will suffer death. In other words, what he said was, over my dead body. Why? Because Lincoln said, we just had an election. We put this very issue before the American people. The American people, through an electoral majority, have decided the matter. This is not a matter of my having a mandate. It's not even my mandate. It's their mandate. And my job is to carry it out. And that is what we Republicans are going to do. Slavery was not ended by the abolitionists. They had no power to do it. They didn't even know how to begin to do it. Slavery was ended by the Republican Party through the Union armies in 1865. That's what brought it to an end. And Lincoln realized that throughout that process he had to be extremely tough and he had to stiffen the spine of the Republican Party. In fact, it came to his attention when the Union Army began to deploy black soldiers that when those soldiers were captured by the Confederacy, they were summarily shot. The Confederacy did not execute white soldiers who were normal prisoners of war, but if a black Union soldier was captured, he was killed. And when this came to Abraham Lincoln's desk, Lincoln issued an executive order, in my opinion, the most barbaric order to come out of the northern side of the war. For every black Union soldier executed by the Confederacy, one Confederate soldier will be summarily shot. Now, why would a moderate man like Lincoln do that? The reason is that Lincoln realized that there is only one way to make them stop. You have to do to them what they are doing to you. And if you don't do that, they'll keep doing it. And to apply this analogy in a different context now, take Antifa roaming the campus, bludgeoning speakers, causing universities to cancel events, block this and stop that. If you let that happen, the bottom line of it is they'll keep doing it. Why? Because that's how they define success. Success is stopping a rival point of view from being heard. And so it is of supreme importance not to let that succeed. Very recently, Condoleezza Rice was given a graduation speaking spot at a university in New Jersey. There was a protest. We'll disrupt her speech. We'll shout. And Condoleezza Rice, very ladylike, withdrew. I don't want to speak at any college that doesn't want to have me. And all the Republicans would cheer, very ladylike, very gracious, wonderful, what an example. But that's not my view of the matter. My view of the matter is that this is a disgraceful abdication. Why? Because if Condoleezza Rice can be canceled and speaking on a campus, no conservative will ever set foot on that campus again. If she is too much for them, who is not? And so what we have in America today, and we all know this to be true in our hearts, whatever our politics, there is a chill wind blowing through the world of American culture, politics, and ideas, and it suffocates you in saying what you think and being who you are and being able to speak your mind. Now, the more conservative you are, the more you feel this pressure. But every independent thinker who is not a slave to what you are told is going to feel this to some degree. And my bottom line message, I've said a lot of things here, but my bottom line message is, it is a part of your own human dignity, it is a part of your intellectual liberation not to put up with this nonsense anymore. And that means you have to figure out ways to undermine the culture of intolerance. And hey, people tell me, oh, Texas A&M's a conservative campus. Yes, it is, but it's even here. And the fact that there is the chill wind even here means you can just imagine how bad it is in other places where the left has more of a, not just a dominant position, a monopoly. When I was an undergraduate at Dartmouth in the early 80s, I could have named 10 conservative professors off the top of my head at Harvard. I knew them by name. I read their work. Today, I'd be hard-pressed to name one. And to my knowledge, there's not a single outspoken conservative in that entire university. They're having a big law case right now about diversity, and they keep chanting diversity this and diversity that, and we want to have gender diversity, and we want to have racial diversity, but the one kind of diversity they'll never mention is intellectual diversity, because they have very little of it. And that's the most important kind of diversity on a college campus. So I leave you with the thought that intellectual liberation and a way to understand what's going on. Here you are insulated from the world for 4 years, and your task is understanding. There'll be plenty of room to do other things later, What your task now is to concentrate on what's going on in the world and make sense of it. And you can't do it if your mind is being suffocated in this way. The Nazis actually called it Gleichschaltung. And I don't make the analogy lightly. I was actually in Munich and Nuremberg a few months ago filming Death of a Nation. And I saw an interesting sight in all these museums. They were talking about the Nazi era with people draping the swastika flag off their balcony or doing the Heil Hitler salute. And I watched it for a while, and I'd seen it in the war movies, but I'd finally asked the question to myself, I go, why do that? Why do Heil Hitler? Where's Hitler? He's not there. Who are you heiling? Why are you flying this dumb flag off your balcony? What are you trying to convey? What are you communicating? And then it hit me. What the family that puts that flag off their balcony is communicating is, I am a humble sycophant. I am a non-troublemaker. Don't look to me to think for myself. What I'm signaling by this flag is if you tell me what to do, including kill a bunch of Jews, I'm ready. Just tell me how many and where and how to do it. So in other words, what this signals is conformity. I will march in lockstep. And what we in America call political correctness now, that's our Gleichschaltung. That's our enforcement of an ideology so rigid that if you're at Google and you write a memo, they'll fire you. And if you're in Hollywood, you write a script that runs athwart the studio bosses, they'll make sure you never work in that town again. And if you're a young professor looking for tenure at Tulane or Oberlin, they'll make sure that your career is squashed. This, to me, is the ugly face of America. It's not the America I fell in love with when I was a kid. It's not the America I believe we want. A lot of our politics now is over which America we're going to have going forward. And I want the America of big possibilities and abundance and choosing your own life and thinking for yourself. An America in which we are all ultimately free to dream our own dreams. Not the dreams of my father, but my own dreams I can dream for myself. It's what Reagan called, in a beautiful moment, morning in America. Thank you very much. Thank you.